The moment Ryan stepped to the front door, a faint sense of unease curled in his stomach. It wasn't unusual. Meeting a girlfriend's parents always carried a certain weight, but this felt different. He had been with Chloe for a few months now, long enough to know her habits, her laughter, the way she twirled her hair when she was deep in thought. But her family? That was an entirely new terrain. The house had the warmth of familiarity, the scent of home-cooked meals lingering in the air. Chloe's mother greeted him first, a pleasant woman with kind eyes, welcoming him with the practiced grace of a host. But it was the man standing near the dining table who held his attention. Mark Carter had a presence that couldn't be ignored. Broad shoulders, strong jawline, salt and pepper hair neatly combed back. Chloe's father exuded a quiet authority. He wasn't just built with age. He carried it like a suit tailored to fit him perfectly. When their eyes met, something flickered in Mark's gaze. Appraisal? Curiosity? Whatever it was, it sent an unexpected shiver down Ryan's spine. Dinner was comfortable enough. Chloe did most of the talking, recounting stories from their time together at college, occasionally brushing her fingers against Ryan's, as if to remind him of her presence. But every so often, he would glance up and catch Mark watching him, not in a way that suggested disapproval. No, it was something else entirely, something unreadable. The conversation flowed around the table, but beneath the casual exchanges, an unspoken tension stretched between two sets of eyes. Ryan tried to shake the feeling, focus on his plate, on Chloe's laughter, on the comforting normalcy of family life. And yet, every glance in that direction left his skin burning. As the plates were cleared and Chloe's mother excused herself to start the coffee, the deep voice of the man across the table finally broke the rhythm of the evening. "Why don't you join me outside for a minute?" Mark said. It wasn't phrased as a question. Ryan's breath hitched for half a second, but he nodded, forcing his expression into something neutral. There was no reason to hesitate. It was probably just a typical father-to-boyfriend talk. Stern words about treating Chloe right, expectations, maybe even a warning or two. And yet, as he followed Mark toward the backyard, the air between them thickened. The cool night wrapped around them, but the warmth that spread through Ryan's chest had nothing to do with the evening breeze. Something told him this conversation was going to be anything but typical. The night air was cooler than Ryan expected, the slight chill settling over his skin as he stepped outside. The backyard stretched into quiet darkness, a wooden fence enclosing the space. A few dim garden lights cast long shadows across the lawn. Mark Carter led the way, his presence imposing even in the stillness. Ryan shoved his hands into his pockets, waiting for the conversation to begin. He had a good idea of what was coming. The typical protective father speech. He'd prepared himself for it. Mark finally turned to face him, arms crossed over his broad chest. His gaze was steady, unreadable. "You've been seeing my daughter for a while now." Ryan nodded. "Yeah, a few months. And what are your intentions?" There it was, the dreaded question. Ryan had heard about this moment from friends. How fathers always wanted to know if their daughters were being treated right, if the boy standing in front of them was worthy. But something about the way Mark asked it didn't feel like a simple formality. His voice was even, measured, but there was something else beneath it. Something that made Ryan's pulse stutter for a fraction of a second. "I care about Chloe," Ryan answered carefully. "She's a great girl." Mark's lips pressed together in a thin line. He studied Ryan for a long moment, as if searching for something deeper. Then, almost too quietly, he said, "You remind me of someone from my past." Ryan frowned slightly. "Oh." There was a shift then, a slight softening in Mark's features, but not in a way that made him any less intense. His stance was still firm, but the weight behind his words carried something else. "You ever meet someone who makes you question everything?" Mark asked, his voice quieter now, like he was speaking more to himself than to Ryan. "Someone who makes you wonder if you've been living the life you actually want, or just the life you were expected to have?" Ryan's stomach twisted unexpectedly. The air between them felt different now. "I guess so," he said slowly, though he wasn't entirely sure why. Mark let out a quiet chuckle, but there was no humor in it. His eyes flickered toward the dark sky before settling back on Ryan. Most people don't realize it until it's too late. Ryan swallowed. His skin felt hot despite the night air. He had never thought much about Mark Carter before tonight. But suddenly, standing here, the way the older man looked at him, with an intensity that was neither friendly nor threatening, felt like something dangerous. And for some reason, Ryan couldn't move away from it. His heartbeat was too fast now, but he forced a casual laugh. I think I just came out here expecting a lecture about treating Chloe right. Mark exhaled, shaking his head slightly. Chloe's a great girl. Smart. Beautiful. He hesitated for a beat before adding. But sometimes people settle for what's expected, not what they truly want. The word sent a strange, electric jolt through Ryan's body. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint rustling of leaves in the night breeze. Ryan told himself he was just imagining things, that there was no reason for the way his chest tightened at the way Mark was looking at him. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just a typical father-to-boyfriend talk anymore. Something else was happening, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. The silence between them stretched, the weight of Mark's last words still hanging in the cool night air. The soft hum of crickets filled the distance where neither of them spoke. Ryan shifted slightly, uncertain whether to say something or wait for Mark to explain the meaning behind his cryptic remark. But then Mark exhaled, a slow, measured breath, as if he'd just made a decision he couldn't take back. "When I was your age," he began, his voice quieter now, "I knew someone I cared about more than I should have." Ryan's brow furrowed slightly, but he stayed silent, letting Mark continue. "He was different. Or maybe it was me that was different when I was with him. I don't know." Mark let out a quiet, humorless chuckle, his gaze drifting toward the sky. "All I know is that I wanted him in a way I wasn't supposed to." Ryan's stomach clenched. He wasn't sure what he expected Mark to say tonight, but it wasn't this. "I was young. Stupid. We both were," Mark went on. "And for a while, it felt like we existed in our own world. But then reality caught up with us." He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. "I made the right choice. Married young. Started a family. Buried everything else so deep, I almost convinced myself it was never real." Ryan's throat was dry. "And do you regret it?" The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Mark turned his gaze back to Ryan, and for the first time tonight, there was no mask of control, no unreadable expression. Just quiet, unspoken truth. "Every damn day." Ryan's chest tightened. He could hear the rawness in Mark's voice, the kind of pain that only comes from years of pretending. For some reason, he couldn't look away. He thought about Chloe, about how he liked her, respected her, cared about her in the way a boyfriend should. But did he love her? Had he ever felt that deep, soul-shaking connection people talked about? No, not like this. Because right now, standing beneath the stars, listening to Mark Carter speak of past regrets, Ryan felt something inside him unravel. The way the older man was looking at him now, like he was searching for something, waiting for something, sent chills down Ryan's spine. It wasn't just nostalgia in his gaze. It was something more, something dangerous. The night air felt thick, pressing in on them. Ryan swallowed hard, but the knot in his throat wouldn't go away. He knew he should step back, say something lighthearted, break whatever this was before it went too far. But he didn't, because despite everything, despite knowing how wrong this was, how completely forbidden it would be, he didn't want to, and neither did Mark. The realization sent a sharp jolt through him, like stepping too close to an open flame. But he didn't move away. Neither of them did. The air between them was unbearably still. The only movement came from the gentle rustling of leaves in the night breeze, but neither Ryan nor Mark seemed to notice. Mark exhaled slowly, the weight of his confession still hanging between them. His gaze flickered downward, lingering on Ryan's lips for the briefest second before snapping back up. Ryan saw it, felt it, and he didn't move away. Mark reached out then, hesitant at first, as if giving himself one last chance to stop. But when his hand finally came to rest on Ryan's shoulder, the touch was firm, warm, and impossibly lingering. His thumb barely grazed the fabric of Ryan's shirt, tracing a slow, almost absent-minded path before stilling. Ryan's breath caught. He should step back, laugh it off, Pretend none of this was happening. But he didn't, because the moment Mark touched him, something inside him shifted. Something he couldn't name, something he had never felt before. It was dangerous, intoxicating, completely and utterly wrong. And yet, he didn't pull away. Their eyes locked, and for the first time, there were no words to hide behind. Mark's hand stayed on Ryan's shoulder, his fingers tightening just slightly, like he was anchoring himself there, like he wasn't sure he'd ever let go. I shouldn't be saying this. Mark's voice was low, rough, barely more than a breath. But I can't stop thinking about you. Ryan's stomach twisted violently. He swore he could hear his own heartbeat, loud and erratic, but it was drowned out by the sheer weight of those words. This wasn't just a fleeting moment. It wasn't his imagination. Mark wanted him. Ryan's hands curled into fists at his sides, as if that would steady him, but it didn't. Nothing could, because he was leaning in. Just enough for Mark to notice. Just enough to let Mark close the gap. And Mark did. The kiss wasn't planned. It wasn't soft or slow or sweet. It was desperate, brief, shattering, completely irreversible. The second their lips met, Ryan felt his entire world tilt. Mark's hand slid from his shoulder to the side of his neck, fingers pressing lightly against his skin, like he needed to feel something real, like he needed proof that this moment wasn't just a dream. Ryan gasped against his mouth, his own hands trembling as they hovered uselessly at his sides. He didn't know what to do with them, didn't know what to do with himself. All he knew was that he didn't want it to stop. But it did, because Mark pulled back first. His breathing was uneven, his chest rising and falling too fast. And when Ryan met his eyes again, there was something there that hadn't been before. Fear. Not fear of what had just happened. Fear of what they both knew would happen next. Neither of them spoke, because there was nothing left to say. This was the moment they couldn't take back. And neither of them wanted to.